If you're going to be there, you need to know why you're there. If you're just living just to be living, that city's going to eat you up and grind you out. You need to actually have a purpose because that gives meaning to all the struggles and the things you're going to go through.
Nappy G is about hair. How does that how does that identity inform your musical styles and
Well,
DJ style?
when it started, I got the nickname. Yeah, I started growing baby dreads. This is like in 1989, 1990. And at that time, nappiness was considered, not positive in Black culture. It was, now it's been completely embraced, and I'm glad to have been part of that first wave of renaissancing it back into positivity. But it really wasn't, for me, I just looked at it as naturalness. Nappiness is being natural. And the funky dreads from Soul to Soul and De La Soul and the Jungle Brothers at this time in like 89, 90, they were really pushing the natural blackness and realness. And I was really into it, and I still am. But, now over time, since I cut my locks off, now it's just because I take a siesta every day. I take my nap, but it still means natural, and it still means, unfiltered and just being yourself. And but at that time, man, if you had nappy hair, if you said you had nappy hair in 90, 91, a lot of people were like, it just was looked down upon, and it was like, but we kind of claimed it. And it affects my music in the same way of like being raw, being real, being soulful, having funky percussive roots, no matter what style or ethnicity, the culture it comes from. Um, yeah, it's always gonna have some rawness to it and some realness to it. Never gonna be completely polished. It's always gonna have, even if it's really professional and super well done, it's still gonna have some rawness and some realness. And I think as we go into the digital age, that just becomes, it's gone full circle where the realness has come back, and people are valuing it again over polished stuff. Like everybody likes to see finished product, but they also like to see things being made. They like to see it happening in real time in front of them. So even if that includes mistakes, whatever, that's one thing I've learned. Like the viewers and the listeners now are valuing realness again, and it's good to see, because for a while wasn't sure how it was gonna go.
Tell us a story about Giant Step and Group Collective. What is Giant Step? What is Group Collective? How did you become involved and or associated? And what was your role in both of those?
Well, Giant Step was a it started as a weekly party, and Groove Collective was a band that formed out of that party. Giant Step actually was two guys, with Morris Bernstein and Jonathan Rudnick, and they were doing promotion for the club SOBs, and they were throwing their own events. They had a side promotion group called Groove Academy, and Groove Academy was throwing shows from 70s and 80s funk and soul bands that had kind of gone out of fashion. And this is like, I'm talking like 1990, 91. Sampling was still new. There was a lot of controversy about how much people could sample legally. The whole thing had happened with De La Soul and Biz Markie and Beastie Boys having mad lawsuits. So a lot of things that were getting sampled, the Groove Academy guys, Morris and Jonathan, were bringing those bands to do the live shows and live events. Ohio Players, Fred Wesley and the JBs, Bootsy Collins, Roger Troutman and Zapp, P Funk. This is all the time. Like all these bands are hot again now, but at this time in New York, they were not hot, and you could only barely fill a small room of diehard music fans with them. But then this party started called Soul Kitchen, and Soul Kitchen's whole vibe was to resurrect those old original tracks that were getting sampled and playing them at the party like fresh, like they were like it was the peak dance floor time. All the songs that got sampled, and they sold 40 ounces of malt liquor, and they had a cook there who made fried chicken. They did all this at SOBs, and it was like super hood rat, but really fun. Also, kind of tied into bringing this old music back. So then the guys from Groove Academy, I was doing promotion for SOBs. I was handing out flyers. I was a percussionist already, and I had a band that had started called Repercussions. And I came to SOBs one time to get flyers to hand out for the club, and I saw this new party that we're going to start called Giant Step, and it had a real jazz, blue note, old '60s vibe on the flyer, and it didn't really say much of what it was. So, but I said, okay, let me come check it. So it was that week I came after a rehearsal, and I had my congas with me from the band rehearsal, and there was almost nobody in the room. It was DJ Smash. There was a flute player. They had video screens up with showing old record covers, like from the '60s and the '50s, classic jazz, bebop jazz record covers from the golden era. Miles Davis, Dizzy Gillespie, John Coltrane. Not some big band swing mess, but real bop jazz, like the sharp stuff, cats in suits, but really playing it. And the DJ was playing some dope, like a hybrid of like jazz and hip hop and house, and it was really cool. And the flute player was there, and there was one guy doing breakdancing, like doing the worm across the dance floor. It was almost empty when it first started. But I asked the flute player, I said, "Hey man, can I jam with you?" I had my congas, and he said, "Yeah." So we start jamming. It was cool. And he said, "Okay, I also do flyers for these guys, but you can come next week." I started to come to hang, and I invited the bass player and the drummer from the Repercussions next time, and we started sitting in. They had music instruments on the stage at SOBs. So we just started jamming with the DJ, and that's how it started. We had a rhythm section. It was drums, bass, me on percussion, and Richard Worth on flute. And I was emceeing, and they had another DJ come in, Jazzy Nice. And then we moved. It got really popular. It started to blow up. Like the club started. It was the same club that did Soul Kitchen in, and that party started to really pop. People were coming. It was on a Thursday night, not a weekend, and but Thursdays got real hot. Soul Kitchen was on Mondays. That was hot. This is when New York had dope parties every night of the week. Weekends were for the amateurs. Like Monday through Friday was the real hot stuff. And so we moved locations because we needed a bigger spot. And we moved to Metropolis Cafe, which was on Union Square, 16th and Union Square West, and right across from Coffee Shop. And Metropolis had a restaurant on top and a club below. And the club below had a really cool vibe, like had that kind of subterranean energy, had a big fish tank, great like layout, long room with like booths and a little mini stage in the back. But it was set up nice. So when you walk in, you kind of eased into it. It wasn't a big open space. But upstairs, they had a jazz quartet playing, horn section, and a vibraphone player instead of a piano player. And they were doing jazz standards. And downstairs, we would start like 11 p.m. and go till 4 a.m. and we'd be killing it. Place was getting packed, and everybody had to walk through the upstairs section to come down just at the front of the restaurant. And one time during the set break, the sax player from upstairs, he came down and just peeked his head in and saw what was going on and was like, "Oh my God," because we had it jumping. And upstairs was dead because it was a restaurant. It was just more of a food gig, a background music type thing, not like where people really dancing to what you're playing. And the sax player came up to me and Richard, the flute player, and the sax was Jay Rodriguez. And he was like, "Hey, you mind if I sit in?" So he sat in with us and was amazing, just incredible playing like really Coltrane style saxophone over the DJ beats, over the tracks. Like we're improvising with the DJ. We're learning how to like find the sections that work, pauses, and how to treat the song the DJ's playing like it's a band and we're sitting in with him instead of we're just playing on top of the track. It's another way of thinking about the music. A lot of musicians still don't get it yet. Where you don't just blow all over, you actually integrate into the sound that's playing and you become part of that sound. And then you find your spots where there's a solo here, oh, there's a break here, but you don't blow over the verse and all. So Jay went upstairs after they finished their gig. He brought all the other horn players down and they started just jamming and loving it. Then the vibraphone player, it's a big machine. It's a big, like, multi octave unit. He asked if he could, bring his vibraphones down. We were like, yeah, why not? Let's help him. So it started to be like after their gig upstairs, they would come down and jam with us. And then we started just really creating like a chemistry together as musicians. Now it's a horn section and a rhythm section and the DJ. And then the DJ could now just drop out and just let us keep the groove. And then we would hold that for like a whole song worth. And then he would fade back in and like mix back in with us. There were no breaks. We just kept it flowing. And that became a style. And through that time, everybody was hanging in the house. Like all the, Diggable Planets wrote their album at our party. Guru was always at the spot. KRS was coming. We had some really great bands that were kind of broke, like had their first break with us, like Brand New Heavies. Really just a lot of great stuff. Because at that time, Marcus Wyatt was doing Delicious Vinyl, and then Marcus has his own house music party now called Deep out in LA. But he was A&Ring for Delicious. Delicious had Brand New Heavies, and the Heavies were tight with Morris from London. There was a whole London Dingwalls connection because London had the Jazz Cafe and Dingwalls, which was their jazz dance party before Giant Step. And they kind of were ahead of us on that. But we created our own energy with it. But because of that, we had the connection with them. So we got a request to do a gig outside of the club, all the musicians from Giant Step. First gig at Nell's. And, we didn't have a name yet. We just called ourselves the Giant Step Tet. And we played upstairs at Nell's and it was dope. It was we and only songs we had were jams we had done from the club. Like okay, let's build around this Hollywood swinging break, or let's build around this Simande break, or Lonnie Liston Smith, expand your mind, expansions. We had some things we knew from the club, but we were really improvising, but then also taking pieces that we liked from the improv and then making those into sections and then turning those into songs. And yeah, I came up with the name Groove Collective as kind of a temporary placeholder because we were all equal. There was no leader. Everybody in the band was an accomplished musician in their own way. But we were all, kind of trusting each other and giving each other the leeway. And so I said, let's call it a Groove Collective because we're a collective. And they were like, yeah, that's okay for now. Nobody ever came up with anything better. So, so yeah, we ended up, just really getting some great gigs out of that time period. They were underground. Downtown Sybarite was the club. Sybarite, which is down by Green Street. It's in Tribeca. And it was an amazing spot. And basically what ended up happening was a guy came to see us who worked. He was Donald Fagen's personal assistant. This is my dear friend Scott Barkham, and he's a keyboard player. And he went back to his studio where he worked and told the guys at the studio, hey, I just saw this band. It was really incredible with live horns and a DJ and improvising. And so he brought down the guy who was the producer for Donald Fagen, who was Gary Katz. And Gary Katz also produced all the Steely Dan albums. And, his best friend was Lenny Waronker, who was at that time the president of Warner Brothers. So Gary came down and loved it. This is when we were still a new band. We had only been together a few months, barely had songs. Then Gary brought Lenny to see us from Warner Brothers, and the next thing we know, we were getting signed before we even really had songs. It was just like it was like really right out of the fairy tale type vibe. But so we ended up recording our album half at the club. We had a remote setup where we had a truck outside Giant Step Club, and we had mics everywhere inside the club recording us, but recording the crowd sound too and the party vibe. Then they had engineers in the truck, and then we did half in the studio. So that's kind of like how we got into that. We got signed and got our first record out, and it had this combination of live and studio. And yeah, all our first tours were with yeah, it was the Roots. They were the Square Roots back then. They were doing festivals and they were killing it back then. They were, were a few bands like at that time, but not that mostly British. It was Galliano. Um, there was Urban Species. Um, it was like the British scene had kind of, we were the New York reps. They were calling it acid jazz. We never liked calling it acid jazz, but that kind of stuck. And then when Guru put out Jazzmatazz, it really just blew up because then that hip hop jazz sound took off and Giant Step became like the natural home for that vibe. And the same Diggable Planets did their record release with us too. Same. Like that became anything that was like soulful and jazzy but didn't fit the mainstream kind of fit in with us. And Jamiroquai, when his first album came out, I mean, yeah, and his band was awesome. Also, another 10-piece amazing band. Um, just it was a great scene that pushed live music and pushed and gave value to musicians and the live improvisation element and not just doing a set that you prepared, but like being in the moment and able to create new things. And people love, and we work with the dancers. That's the thing. When the dancers are going and they're feeding the energy where you're as a musician, you're playing off what they're doing on the dance floor and vice versa. They're not looking at the band on the stage like spectators. They're actually translating what they hear through their bodies on the dance floor. And that's exciting. Like, so that really gave that an energy to our music, that's hard to capture when it's a regular crowd. We like to Groove Collective was always about let's make the people dance and feel it. And then, we'll all feel more like we connected and not just have them standing around looking at us.
Wow, that was fantastic. So what happened to Groove Collective?
Well, basically, life. Yeah, people got wives and kids, and what really happened was there were a couple of business differences. The beauty of having a group with no leader is you have creative flow. You can go any direction, and there's no ceiling. The negative part is making business decisions. It's difficult. You don't get resolution on things. You move slower. You miss opportunities because you argue and debate too much. Um, so like basically the band got nominated for a Grammy, um, and had some really was really doing well on the festival circuit, but there kind of became a split of like, okay, now you can either stick with this kind of you know unique niche or try to get bigger. And if you get bigger, you're gonna change your core demographic and it's some things. And so there was a split. And some guys wanted to go more the way to make more money, and that meant picking a different agent and a different booking. And some of us wanted to kind of stick with a plan of like, let's do it the way we've been doing it, but just keep building. And so there was some, and then when that split, that kind of difference in opinion happened. This is right around 2000. the millennium was there, and a lot of things were shifting. And so yeah, a couple of us decided, let's try to do something else and keep the band as family, but not be in it full time. So during these like the end of the '90s, the last Giant Step DJ before it went to New Music Cafe where you saw it was Nicodemus, and Nicodemus was bringing a real hip hop underground b-boy element mixed with Latin, a lot of Latin flavors and some Afro flavors. And he started doing a party called Organic Grooves. And Organic Grooves was also a jamming kind of crew, but different style, more on the dub reggae, um, dub electronic style. They call it Italo disco. That's what it would be called now. Um, yeah, they had, really cool keyboard synth dub out stuff and a great percussionist and a couple of cool horn players. But very different sound. They were not on the jazzy vibe. They were still improvising, but it was a more electronic and deeper, bass heavy sound. And so I went to sit in and started playing with them, and their percussionist was really cool. We had a great vibe, and he and Nicodemus wanted to start their own party, so they started another thing called Turntables on the Hudson, and that was on the West Side Highway on the Frying Pan, the boat. And first, it was also on the hockey rink. There's a if you go past that, there's an ice skating rink upstairs at Chelsea Piers, and then past that is a big deck outside. It was a summertime outdoor party on the waterfront, and the percussionist Mariano was also a hairstylist, so he had like his core audience was like 100 beautiful women who just came wherever we went. So that party started out very international, and that kind of took off. So by the time it was time for me to leave Giant Step, I mean, and leave Groove Collective, I'd already been doing turntables on the Hudson parties, playing percussion and DJing. I just started DJing after years of playing with DJs. And yeah, it was like it was the passing of the torch from Giant Step to turntables on the Hudson, because Nicodemus and me had been in Giant Step and we knew that energy, but we were ready to take it more Latin and Afro international flavor. And so yeah, then turntables became like the next 10 years of my life. And it's an amazing party. Still, it's not weekly anymore. Now they do events with Nicodemus and I still do stuff. Mariano's he went back to just doing hair and he still loves music. Um, but yeah, that became a record label also called Wonder Wheel. And there's always events with Giant Step and Turntables on the Hudson together, because Giant Step continued as a brand and has kept going, doing amazing projects and music coordination. They actually did the music coordination for the 1619 project on Hulu last year, which was really dope, really dope. And they got nominated for an Emmy. They might have even won. I can't remember if they won the Emmy for that, but they deserved it for sure. And they've done just a lot of great projects over the years. But that one, to me, it really was like it epitomized all the stuff over the years. Like, this is covering all the range of music and they always respected and honored Black culture and Black music as the kind of one of the big contributions the USA has made to the world. Is what our Black people, Black Americans, synthesized out of the mess they gave us, and we turned it into something beautiful on many levels, different kinds of out expressions. But yeah, man. So I have one big story I have from that time. I just remember was the Tupac story. Was they wanted to do Tupac MTV wanted to do live, like kind of the first live, hip hop televised R&B soul thing. So they wanted a house band. So we were like the house band for like a lot of those events. Before the Roots, it was the Giant Step rhythm section guys. So it was like half of Groove Collective, half of Repercussions, and the keyboard player Victor from Cooley's Hotbox, who and now they that band turned into Tortured Soul. It's all connected. But and Victor became Tickler. Tickler is now like a huge reggae producer. But we backed up. It was SWV, Shy, and Tupac with Digital Underground. And at this time, Digital Underground was they had I Get Around with Tupac, which was a big hit. But all of Tupac's solo stuff was just about had just come out, like Dear Mama, and he had a couple other, but Dear Mama was a big one. Um Keep Your Head Up. That was it. Keep Your Head Up. So yeah, he had I Get Around, and then Keep Your Head Up was the big hit, and then Mama was about to come out. So we had an amazing rehearsal with Digital, because so Digital Underground was Shock G and Money B. And Shock G was like the kind of brainchild genius, behind it all. Like he had the funk energy and he played keyboards, and he showed us the chords and the sound check for I Get Around, and you could see like he was really the music mind, and so funny, so cool. And Money B was like kind of like hood gangster Oakland, like guy had that Too Short vibe, that Oaktown energy. And Tupac was like their little brother almost, like when he was with them. And he was mad cool and everything was chill. And then we did the sound check with them, and then they bounced, Money being Shy G. And then Tupac's crew showed up, the Outlaws, who were like younger and definitely more thugged out. And it was like you can see the split personality going on with him, like as he was coming out of Digital shadow and becoming his own person. But he still had this kind of, image to live up to, because he had been from the East Coast and had moved out west. And he had his boys still from the East Coast. So he was trying to show them that he was still that dude. And yeah, I mean, he was like completely wilding out with them. Like it was like night and day. Um, so the show went great, and it was an amazing concert. We rocked that. It actually, even now on video on MTV and YouTube, that's still one of the top rated live hip hop show. People send me clips every year. Like I'm like, is that you? Like, yeah, that is me. It's like kind of crazy. Um, but after the show, we had the after party at Nell's. Nell's was the spot. Nell's was always like, the downstairs at Nell's. And like, yeah, that's where a lot of the craziness went down, where like basically the there was at one point in the night, our friend Jazzy Nice, who also played at Giant Step, Jazzy was DJing, and our friend Jules was the other DJ. He did Monday Night at Cheetah Club. And I was hanging out with them after the show, just by the DJ booth, and there was like a circle formed on the dance floor, and we were looking over like, "What's going on?" And everybody's like, "Yo, there's Tupac. There's a girl in there. She's hooking him up. She's on the floor." And we were like, "What?" And it was crazy. And then yeah, like not long after that, the whole thing came out where he got charged with had letting his boys do stuff to a woman that she didn't sign up for, wasn't down with. And but it was, you could see like he was hanging out with the wrong heads too much. He should have stayed with Shock G and Money B. They had him like just chilled out. But he was wilding out. He was young too, but it was just like he was mad cool though. I will say that as far as the sound check and the performance was great. And nobody knew he was going to be that big. But I remember when we got cassettes. This was like '92. When we got the cassette, it was named '93. Of all his stuff, it was like, man, this dude is his lyrics. We were like, okay, all right, he's got some real lyrics here. Like, because Keep Your Head Up was like really conscious and very positive, and like, and also Dear Mama. Also, it was like, okay, this dude's trying to say something. So it's been really interesting to see how his legacy has just blown up over the years. Like he had such a short window and he just really did so much.
Wow, what a story. What a story. Uh, Tell us a story about the Palladium.
Oh man, Palladium. Woo. Well, so okay, I did gigs there as a percussionist separate from Giant Step. They had really big weekend parties. Like the main dance floor there was also the MTV at that time had a weekly dance party on TV, and they had they did it at Palladium. So there were screens everywhere, and they had this thing they would do where they would have women in cages suspended over the dance floor like 50 feet. It was it's a big room, the ceilings were like 70 feet. And they'd have these women in cages, go dancing over the crowd. And then on the stage, they had these platforms and they would have live musicians. This is like 95, 96. This is after Giant Step already made it really hot. And they would sometimes it would be a percussionist or two percussionists or a percussionist and a horn player or something. And they would raise you up on the stage, like 40 feet on these hydraulic lifts. And once you're up there, you're up there. You had to go to the bathroom. Anything you needed to do, you had to do it before you go up on the lift. But the lights, you'd be up almost by where the top of the spotlights were. It was crazy. But they had a great sound system there. And the VIP room there was called the Michael Todd room. Hector Romero used to kill it there. That was his spot, man. He would always rock serious house music was going on in the Michael Todd room. Um, one of the best show I ever played there as a as a musician was through Giant Step when Brand New Heavies had their first album out. It's called the first single was called Dream Come True. It was the first number one US hit. It was already a hit all over Europe, but it hit number one in Europe in the US. And so Giant Step was putting on a George Clinton and P Funk show. It was the first P Funk show they'd done in about 2 or 3 years. And it was supposed to be a reunion of almost all the original P Funk people. And it was going to be Brand New Heavies, and the Brand New Heavies were going to play with Blowfly. We were going to back up Blowfly, and then it was going to be the P Funk show. And so the Heavies have a drummer, a bass player, and a guitarist, but they needed the rest of the rhythm section to pick up locally. So they hired me and another percussionist and some horns, and I think a keyboardist. And we were going to play with them and do their set, and then also do the Blowfly set. And Blowfly, for people who don't know, Blowfly was like a kind of one of the early forefathers of rap, kind of like Dolomite from the early 70s, black exploitation times. But he was famous for doing dirty versions of hit songs. Like he would just make punchlines out of the title and out of the lyrics, but make it all dirty words. And it would be funny, like shitting on the dock of the bay. Like all that, like that's it was Blowfly was, but he was also in his real day job, he was actually a serious songwriter. He wrote a bunch of real songs with Isaac Hayes for Stax Records, and you know, but Blowfly was kind of like he would wear this like homemade superhero costume, like it was like over the top, but kind of the kind of music that like my uncle and my grandfather might have been listening to when I was little, like funny but not mainstream, but definitely underground if you knew that music, and funky. So the Brand New Heavies they missed the rehearsal. We had the rehearsal and only Clarence, Blowfly was there, and Clarence lived in St. Louis, I think, and he was like famous for being like just like a real eccentric dude, like not typical at all. Really came to New York and was wild out, was famous for going to on mad porno binges and shit. And like, but he was super cool and he was just really funny in the rehearsal. Heavies got stuck in customs, so they had a few hours at the airport where they couldn't get through all of the guys. So they came in mad late. We'd already been waiting on them for like 5 hours. They were tired. They said, "Look, we're not gonna rehearse. We don't have time, and we need to rest. Our singer, her voice is sore, India. We need to just get some rest. Don't worry, we'll do our set. We know you guys got it, and we'll wing it with Blowfly. We'll wing it." So the next night it is a P Funk show. It really was a P Funk show at Palladium with Brand New Heavies and Blowfly. Brand New Heavies were looking at it like this is a Brand New Heavy show with George Clinton. They didn't understand. No, this is a P Funk show. The people coming there are there to see George and the boys. Now the sound check that afternoon, George and Bernie Worrell missed the sound check because they were doing the David Letterman show. So it was like all of the cats from P Funk at the sound, like 20 people up on stage, two or three of them are in diapers, a couple of guys in raincoats. It's like people like it's just looking mad crazy up there, like and the noise. There were like six guitars, four basses. It was like double and triple everything. Like it was cats hadn't seen each other. It was a combination family reunion and jam session, but it was chaos. It was just like just didn't see how it was gonna make sense because even the sound guys were like, we don't know who's running this or what's going on. It was just madness. Brand New Heavies had a decent sound check, and then but Blowfly they didn't practice any of the Blowfly songs because all his songs are like standard R&B soul that they were just gonna play. Like, okay, we'll play, Clean Up Woman, or we'll play this or that, and then he'll do his stupid lyrics. So, but they weren't ready for the crowd. The crowd was just like, man, just it was like they were so hyped to see George and P Funk that every spare minute, if there was not any, if the DJ brought the music down, you just heard the crowd going, "We want the funk, we want the funk." So the Brand New Heavies had all these, really big arrangements for their songs, and every song had a big ending like ba 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 ba. We want the funk. We so like after the first couple of songs, they start looking around at the band like, wait, is it? It's not gonna get any better than this. Like, and like they it's like, no, come on, maybe we'll play harder. Well, didn't matter. Every song, no matter how good it was, when it was over, it was just we want the funk. And they were panicked and freaked out because they'd been getting so much love everywhere else in the world. They just didn't know what was going on. They went so then they were like, okay, they finished their set, and then Blowfly comes out in his crazy outfit, and the heavies didn't really know what his deal was. So Blowfly, he comes out, he's like, all right, how many men got them big old Blowfly dicks? How many women got those gigantic Blowfly pussies? And the heavies are looking at each other like, what is he what's he saying? What is this? So they start like sneaking off the stage, like the guitar player takes his guitar off, Blowflies, and the crowd is starting to say, "We want the funk" to Blowfly, and they're booing, and Blowfly's like, "You can't boo me, I'm Blowfly. I invented this shit. I'll teach all of you." And he's going off. He's battling the crowd. Meanwhile, all the guys in the Brand New Heavies, the bass player, the guitar, they took their instruments out and snuck off the stage. Blowfly still got his back to he can't see what's happening in the band. And so like literally he's like battling with the crowd and he's like, all right, we're about to show y'all, we're about to fuck it up. And now it's only me on one side of the stage on percussion and the other percussionist on the other side. And one saxophone player. Everybody else has left the stage, but we've been hanging with him in sound check and rehearsal. We were like, we can't leave Clarence up here like that. But he thinks it's the whole band. He's like, I'm gonna show you P Funk, you idiots. I'll show y'all when the band. We're gonna do it right now. 1, 2, 3, hit it. And you just heard like a shaker, like and one guy going boom, buck, doo doo, and the sax like beepity boop boop. But it was he turned around like what? Yo, you motherfuckers! Like kill all of y'all. He ran off the stage, completely embarrassed. We were like, yo, we tried, Clarence. Yo, we were here. We didn't leave you hanging, man. So then we go backstage, and now P Funk's getting ready to come on. And George had just come from the David Letterman show with Bernie. And George had on, this is his peak crack days. He had on a hotel bed sheet. He had written like things in marker on it, like love, peace, war, hate, joy, all these different emotions he had written on it in a marker. He had on his big ski goggles. He had his, multicolored dreads at this time. But he was super cool and very nice. He was hanging out backstage. Like the rest of the band is now on the stage. It's just George and Bernie and me and the other percussionist from Blowfly. And the crowd is nuts at the Palladium. Like the room is just rocking. It's filled to the brim. It's probably about, I don't know, 4,000 people maybe. And George is super calm. He's like, "Oh, what are you guys' names?" I said, "I'm Nappy G," and the other guy's name was Dizzy D. "No, Dizzy D and Nappy G. That's a nice song right there. Y'all should make a song out of that." So, well, you boys ready? We're about to do this for about 5 hours now. We're going to be on about maybe 4 or 5 hours. And we were like, we started laughing. He's like, "No, no, we're going to play for 5 hours straight. We're not stopping." And we were like, "What?" He's like, "Yep. I'll see you on the other side." And he went out there, and man, they really did it for 5 hours straight. Our knees, our legs were tired at the end of that show. I mean, they worked it. They did. Oh, and De La Soul came out and they did Me, Myself, and I with De La. Um, I tried to get on the stage to play timbales on Me, Myself, and I, but they say you can go, but there's no mics. There's every microphone is taken. They had like 50 people up on stage. But that was my favorite Palladium party was the P Funk Brand New Heavies Giant Step show. That was my favorite Palladium.
Wow. Incredible. Incredible, incredible, incredible. Tell us a story about Save the Robots and tell people what Save the
Mm,
Robots was.
mm. Wow. Yeah. Save the Robots was a amazing after hours spot in the East Village on I think it was on Avenue C between Second and Third Street. And yeah, it was like it's where everybody went after the regular club, whatever that was, wherever that was. So you had party people there. You also had the workers from the other clubs and restaurants coming there. And it would really get started around 4 a.m. and then it would go until whenever, lunchtime, if you could make it. But it was upstairs and a downstairs. The upstairs was like I always tell people, reminded me of the Star Wars cantina. That was the vibe I would get. The lighting was weird in there, and there was sand. They had sand on the floor too. It was sand. They had this kind of layer of like I don't know 3 or 4 inches of sand, like you're almost on a beach, sort of upstairs. And then downstairs was low ceiling, not a big room. Probably the ceiling was probably like 10 feet, and it just had that kind of weird basement energy, but they always had really cool electronic music, and it was definitely a place where you weren't going to make requests and you were just there. It was like the scene was kind of self-sustaining. You whatever was happening that night, you just kind of got with it, or because they weren't going to change it for you. But it was a really amazing kind of it's one of those spots you never know who you're going to see at Save the Robots because it's the end of the night and people coming there from uptown, downtown, Brooklyn, Bronx, wherever. Like if there's nothing else happening, you go to Robots, something's going to be popping up. And so it was like, yeah, the people who didn't want to go to sleep, the people who, you know, just wanted some different music or a vibe, they would be there. And it was like you always see some interesting people. But one night, and this was back in the 90s. And when if you had weed, like the whole thing with stop and frisk, like police in New York used to use weed as an excuse to stop anybody they didn't like and search them, whether you had it or not. And Robots was like it was an after hours club, so there was like always people in there on every kind of thing, powders, different powders and pills, and weed was the least of it. It was like not a big deal to have weed, but you didn't want to be caught there if any undercovers came. And one night after a Giant Step gig, I had just a friend of mine who was also a herbal dealer. He had hooked me up with like an eighth of weed right before I went to Robots, but right before I left the Giant Step party, I had this eighth of weed. And, we were at Robots, we're smoking downstairs. It was no big deal. And then all of a sudden, they kind of bring the lights up a little bit and start flicking them on and off. And they say, hey, there's undercovers here. They're going to search everybody on the way out. And if anybody has anything, they're getting taken in, whatever it is. It was like, oh, we were all like, oh shit. And everybody in there was like, oh no. Like you saw people like just eating whatever they had in their pockets, like, let me get this shit out of like, oh, people panicking. I just stuffed the weed down in my pants, but it was had this smell. It smelled like super skunky. Like it made me smell like I hadn't had a shower in 3 weeks. So I get up. Finally, they're frisking everybody at the door as you leave. And the one guy he frisked me, and he gets down. And he goes like, "Whoo, man! Oh man! I don't know what that is, and I'm not gonna look, but it smells like some really good shit. Get out of here!" And he let me out. He let me go. He knew what it was, but he also was like, "I'm not really trying to get all up in your crotch, Like, you just get out of here." That was a good robot getaway story.
Wow.
It was
Wow.
already daylight. It was like 8 a.m. already outside.
Tell us a story about and tell us what was Windows on the World.
Oh man, Windows on the World was a club. It was a restaurant and a club. Mainly, it was a restaurant that had a club in it. It was in the World Trade Center on, I think it was the 107th floor. It was way up there. It was at least it was around 100 stories up. And when you were up there, you could see helicopters below you, and you could feel when the building would slowly just be rocking like in the wind. But they used to do on Wednesday nights they used to have a party. It was literally called the best party in the world, and it wasn't the best party in the world, but the guy who was the promoter for it was really um persistent and was at every party, every club, and would invite so many people, different walks of life and different styles, different genres. And it was really like a networking party before networking parties were even called that. Like that was like you go there and people would just be trading business cards, and like it was a good excuse to go to Windows on the World because it was normally on regular weekend nights and regular nights. It was a very expensive high end place to go. It was kind of like Tavern on the Green, or it was high end. But when they would do their Wednesday night party, it was kind of open to everybody, all the riffraff, including the regular club people. So it was like the one kind of chance to go to the World Trade and actually hang out and party a little bit and not be around just a bunch of uptight, only stockbrokers and Wall Street people. Because that's usually what it would have been. Um, but there, yeah, it was. I met some really interesting international people, and this is pre-internet, pre-cell phone. You know, it's like it's hard to reconceptualize that now. What it was like to go out without GPS, without cell phone, without having anything except that week's recommendation from the Village Voice newspaper or the New York Press newspaper. They were like word of mouth was real. It was a real thing. Like somebody cool told you there was a good thing happening, you would go check it. And, and it was like you really trusted the people who knew stuff. It wasn't, you couldn't just find things like, look it up real quick on the internet. There was none of that. And you couldn't actually even call people once you were there to invite them because there were no payphones. It was like maybe you might find a payphone, 2 floors below you in the World Trade Center. But yeah, it was just a different energy. So yeah, you would meet some really interesting international travelers who would just kind of be passing through New York at that Wednesday party. And I actually one time in Italy, I did run into somebody recognized me in Italy a couple years ago, who I met at one of those parties just randomly. It was like, you look like this guy I met like a long time ago, but he had dreads. And I was like, yeah, where did you meet him? And we started talking and like, yeah, it was always windows on the world. But that was one of those spots. Yeah, on Wednesdays they were. It's like that was the regular people's night. The drink prices came down. Everything was like real for that one night. So that was actually really cool to actually check that. I had a friend who actually worked in that restaurant, and he was getting some kind of eye surgery on 9/11. So he wasn't in the building, but everybody who worked at that place in the restaurant, they were there at 8 a.m. on that Tuesday, 9/11. They all lost their lives, unfortunately. That place was like it was all workers. Like that was the one thing on 9/11. It was mainly like the working class, the early people who got to the building at 9 a.m., the cleaning staff and the low level people, unfortunately. Yeah, it sucked. But that would just being able to say that I was there is pretty awesome because that's one of those places that is never coming back.
Great story. Tell us a story about Cheetah Club Mondays.
Ooh, man. Cheetah Club, man. Man, that's just around the time you were saying you were a new music head. This is like, yeah, late 90s, early 2000s. And that was like it was a hip hop kind of like it was like a hip hop and dance hall reggae feature night. And it was put on by these three women. It was Belinda and Bonnie and Taquana. And they had Jules was the DJ. Jules was a British DJ who was he didn't ever spin a giant step, but he was spinning at Nell's that whole time we were doing giant steps, and he's an OG. Like you know, he definitely he knew he knew all the cool like hip hop stuff to play, and all the cats gave him like the unreleased 12 inches, and for a white British dude, he definitely had his finger on the pulse of what was going on. But that party became like really it was like a in the early days of bottle service when women were doing like the R&B hip hop thing was at its peak then. Like so women were really getting dressed up, super high end, and it was like kind of glamorous in that sense. And the women who ran the party, they invited me to come play percussion with Jules for this thing. And like I was like, really? You want percussion at it's like a hip hop party? And they were like, yeah, but it's gonna give it a different energy. And I was really skeptical, but it worked. Somehow it worked. I love hip hop. I grew up with hip hop my whole life. And since I'm almost the same age. So it was like it was cool for me, but also interesting for people who come into that scene. A lot of them never really saw live instruments. They were used to just studio or hearing recordings and samples. So some of them really loved it. Some people would be like, "Oh, why are you playing?" I just set the Cheetah Club tone was like it's hip hop. It's like it was dudes who were trying to impress really done up and high end ladies, and but with a lot they were just buying bottles. Bottles. This is the era when bottles came in really big, and like if a dude could buy a bottle, he was literally walking around the club with it, almost like a caveman. Um, but the music was pretty dope. and definitely it was two. I had a couple. One time, um, something popped off where basically, uh, who was it? Somebody started. I don't know if they had a gun. I don't think they actually started shooting, but they had a gun, and people panicked, and so the room started clearing. Everybody started trying to head towards the door, and at one point, I remember there was like some big dudes just picked up a table, like a table like there was like a heavy, cocktail table that was like, very expensive, and they pushed it up against the door. And I look at these gigantic dudes. They look like wrestlers, like, and everybody. I was like, who is that? They were like, people were like, that's the Booyah Tribe from LA. It was a hip hop group of Samoan. They were all Samoans. They were gigantic, and they were actually bodyguards for some stars, and they just took over there and just barricaded the room so nobody bad could get in. And like you look around and people are like all like crouched down. You see like, who's that over there? Oh, that's Wesley Snipes is crouched over there. That's Jay-Z crouched over there. But everybody was like laying low while Booyah Tribe took care of it. uh Another time, they had some celebrity. They had like a VIP booth behind where I was near the booth, and there was a little stage. And on the stage, they made the stage the VIP, but kept the lights down low. Had like circular couches, and Donatella Versace would come there with Lenny Kravitz, and they would be hanging out, and you'd see like people like that. But the most famous person that I ever saw come there was Prince. Prince came there, and he was in his pimp mode. He had on like a really nice, like fitted 2 or 3 piece, polyester type suit, and his cane, and had his little entourage, and they went behind me to the booth. And then he had one of his gigantic bodyguards bring a briefcase up to the DJ, to Jules. And what it was he wanted to try out a new record that he had just pressed. And the guy it was dramatic right out of the movies. He had that briefcase handcuffed to his wrist, the bouncer guy, and then he like opens it up, takes the vinyl out, gives it to Jules, and says, Prince wants to hear this. And Jules had never heard it either. He didn't know if it was good or bad, but you don't question Prince. What are you gonna say? And he was like, is it because I talked to Jules later, he was like thinking like, is this gonna fit? Like, what is this gonna even be? He's like, but you can't. Like, this like big bouncer dude is like next to him and like stressing him, like, put it on. He wants to hear it right now. And this is when he was still called the artist. He hadn't changed his name back to Prince. He's like the artist. Artist wants to hear this. And so Jules put it on, and everybody knew Prince was in the house. So like people were like hyped to feel it, and it came on. Everybody was like, I guess like. It was kind of like it was like, well, it's okay. Like everybody was like, it wasn't really moving the floor that much. It was like Prince trying to do kind of his version of hip hop, of a hip hop beat, and it was like not really. It was like dumbing it down. It just didn't work. But the funny thing was like, right, so the song, he plays it, and the guy stands there and waits, and then as soon as it's over, the guy takes the record, puts it back in the briefcase, and walks back down to the booth and like gives the briefcase to Prince. So the night goes on, and Jules goes back to his jams, and people definitely were getting hype, and definitely it was like girls were kind of dancing for Prince, and the energy was nice, and I was playing percussion, it was going good, and right, and he's getting ready to leave with his whole entourage, and I see them walking out one by one, and he's like near the end of the entourage, and as he's walking by, and I'm playing timbales, which is the drums that Sheila E plays, and he looks over at me, he's like, "That was pretty good, little Sheila," and and I was like, "Well, I think I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you, thank you. I will take that. Thank you."
That's
uh,
dope.
Yeah, but yeah, a lot of rappers talk about Cheetah Club. Jay Z put it in a couple of songs, and one of those. It was a hip hop spot for Mondays for about 3 years, 4 years.
Tell us a story about Ian Friday's Tea Party.
Mm, Ian, oh man, he's a great, great house music DJ and producer, and just a just a good person. He so a lot of back in the '90s, a lot of the best kind of big club parties were in Manhattan, but a lot of people lived in Brooklyn. And Ian was one of the people who was like really instrumental in starting Brooklyn club, like the Brooklyn dance scene. He was basically like all these people who go over to Manhattan to do their dancing. Why not? Why can't we have a party here in Brooklyn that gets all that energy, but without all the Manhattan BS and with just the realness from the hood, from the real people. And he started doing parties at the I don't know if it's where he started, but at least when I started checking him, he was at the YWCA in downtown Brooklyn, and it's a big space. But it was right in the heart of downtown Brooklyn, and this is at the you know late '90s, I would say, and it was just Brooklyn hadn't had its full blow up yet. It was a lot of people, a lot of cool artists and folks living there, but it hadn't had that Williamsburg gentrification thing, and Fort Greene and Clinton Hill hadn't been completely taken over yet. So it was still affordable, and where the location was just right downtown, and it was like not where anybody was throwing. There were no parties there. There was nothing there. It was at night, everything was closed. It was just a 9 to 5 downtown business area. But he would throw this really dope. He called it a tea party, and it had this other energy that was like it had a real like down home, comfy, like almost like a house party, like in somebody's house, but just a much bigger place. But they had tarot card readings, and it was all very black, very Afrocentric and very black um, vibe to it, and really kind of clarifying and establishing, like, yeah, that black core of house music and soulful house music, and but giving it a really comfy energy, and it's like the total opposite of what people call EDM or any of that stuff. This was like a very rootsy energy. People could they had some people selling homemade food there, and it was just they also kind of developed its own little African market that was attached to it with handmade, jewelry and clothing and stuff like that, and just became a really cool part of the Black Brooklyn Renaissance scene that I think Spike Lee had been a big part of getting that going in the early '90s, late '80s, and yeah, Tea Party. I think the first time I saw DJ Spinner might have been at one of Ian's tea parties. I mean, a lot of cats, Rich Medina, a lot of people came through there who are now well known as kind of icons of the roots and the realness. But Ian was doing that, before anybody really, and holding it down. He still is. He's still holding it down. He looks great. He didn't cut his dreads. Yeah, it's just a really cool scene, and anything you see from Ian Friday or anybody from his crew, it's gonna be the real thing. So good people, really good people.
Define soulful house music.
Hmm. Everybody's got different. I mean, for me, it involves really good bass lines, and it can involve really soulful gospel influenced vocals. There's a lot of good soulful house that it's instrumental too. But I think it's for me, most house music it's coming out of that, you know, we could say it came out of disco, but I think really all of that came out of the Pentecostal church. It's coming out of a gospel influence, and it's like catching the spirit and that feeling of like you're riding a wave and then you catch some really big peaks and just let them roll for a while, and it's energy music. But it's not based on big just flashy moments, but it's like a longer waves and cycles. And it's definitely, yeah, the bass lines and the soulfulness, I think, is coming out of the bass and the that church vocal element. There's call and response to it. And there's just an energy where, yeah, you can't it's not just a formula.
What happened to New York?
Man, I think it's a combination of so many things, but I think Giuliani, when he was mayor, he really pushed this sterilized image of it. And there were some TV shows also that pushed a sterilized image of it that made a demographic want to come there that really wasn't connected to the roots of it. So like Friends and Seinfeld and shows like that, which I have no problem with that, and I really actually like Seinfeld a lot. Sex in the City, shows like that. They presented this really sterile, very white centric, Eurocentric perspective on New York, when New York has always been working class and multicultural and based around, yeah, the people of those cultures kind of creating the flavor of the city. And it wasn't ever that flavor, those really cool cultural flavors weren't built around the white perspective. White people were welcome to come get in on it, like in the Harlem Renaissance, and like in the salsa revolution in the 50s. Like that's the original Palladium, was a salsa club, like, and it was a dance club for that kind of Latin music. But yeah, it's like New York. I think it got when you had a mayor who was all about the money and was very implicitly racist and anti-black, anti-Latino. They kind of, they made it. One of the things Giuliani did was he pushed all the clubs into zones. Like, it used to be any spot you could have a club in New York. Then he's like, not only in these certain areas, and those areas cost certain amounts, and they're only going to be big clubs. And a lot of the best clubs in New York was always small. They were small and medium size, and just had a great energy. It wasn't about how many people were there; it was about the quality over quantity. So you had great music and great people who loved it. And then because the prices went up and the rents went up, it's harder and harder for little small clubs and medium clubs to stay alive, and harder for artists to keep living there. And the whole the it's like the usual story. The cool people make a poor neighborhood happen and make it really interesting. And then the people with money want to move there, and they move there and they make the prices of everything go up, and then the original people get pushed out, and the cycle just keeps going. That's gentrification everywhere, where it's like somebody makes it hot, not because they're trying to impress some rich people, but because that's how they just have style, and that's how they live, and they're making the best of what they have. And then other people come and they try to appropriate some elements of that. And yeah, now it's not a working class city anymore. It's like it used to be much more built around the working class. And what it takes to be working class in New York now is so much. It costs so much just to be working class. Like, if you're not making 100,000, you're barely you're barely lower middle class. If you It's like the rents are crazy. Everything is crazy there in terms of the pricing. Wall Street, internet, a lot of things got valued in a disproportionate way, and the real things started to be worth less. And then these kind of shimmery, superficial things started to be worth more. So it's still got a lot of culture and soul, and it's still an international hub. It's just harder to make it there and harder for artists to survive there for the years it takes to really build. If you now people can go for 1 or 2 years, and if they don't make it in that time, they probably got to try somewhere else. But used to be, you could live there 10, 12 years and just be steady pushing because it was affordable. Now, it's not, it's just you make a lot, but you spend a lot. So it's unfortunately, I think that's happened to a lot of cities. I think the big cities have all felt that. That's why you see medium-sized cities starting to really thrive because they kept the cost of living more reasonable. And if you have universities and a reasonable rent and reasonable grocery prices, you're gonna have a cool place. I don't care whether it's a big city or a little city. So once you start making rent and groceries too expensive, you're automatically going to lose your core, your foundation of artists and working class. So that's really what's going on with New York. I hope it, it's still there. It's still going. They need to do some more kind of price, uh, kind of sliding scales for costs for things. Like if you make this much, this is what something should cost. And it's other countries and other cities are doing that. They're even having rent reductions. Berlin's a great city to study for how they've been doing their urban planning. They're really fighting gentrification. It's happening, but they're pushing back against it, and they're making it illegal for private corporations to own more than a certain number of residential uh, apartments. Because yeah, when you have corporations owning apartments, it's everybody knows they're just going to be greedy and go for the highest bidder, and that pushes out people who really are a part of the community and who've been there a long time and contributed their energy to that, to making that area nice. And so you got to kind of balance it out, keep the local people happy, and you want to have some new people coming in, but you got to keep your core people as a focus. And in New York, unfortunately, that core, they just keep it rolling. Like, who's up next? Who can afford it? The next core, who's up? So there's still some diehards who are lifelongers. They're gonna be there, and I'm happy for that. Thank God for that. But we need more that to be encouraged more.
Looking back across your musical journey in New York City in its heyday, what's the biggest lesson you've learned?
Uh, hmm, there's a lot of them. I guess one of the biggest lessons is if you if you know why you're what if you have a mission or a purpose in life, then it's easier to persist through whatever is going to get thrown at you. That's what I always say about New York now to people is if you're going to be there, you need to know why you're there. If you're just living just to be living, that city is going to eat you up and grind you out. You need to actually have a purpose because that gives meaning to all the struggles and the things you're going to go through to reach whatever your goal is. And so I feel like when you're focused and have a reason to be somewhere, any big city that can be crazy and lonely and expensive and all the bad things, but there's all the good things. You have all these amazing people you meet and all this cultural input you get, and you evolve in a way that you wouldn't do on your own because you're getting a synthesis of ideas. But if you have a reason to be there, you can survive almost anything. So I feel like people, instead of asking, if they should still go to New York or wherever, Paris or London, it's more like, what do you want to do, and how does that city fit into that? If it, if if you're not if there's no interconnectivity and you're just in a place that's really tough and you don't know why you're there, yeah, you're gonna get eaten up. But when you have a mission, you can focus in. So I just say like, yeah, the there's no backstage when you're in places like New York. You're always on. So you gotta, you have to know why you're there and have a reason to be there. Unless you're rich, then you can just be wherever you want to be. But if you're not like, naturally rich or born rich or whatever, I think yeah, it's a lot harder to just to live there. But having focus, having purpose, finding out what you want to do and what your next phase in your life, what you want that to be, that makes everything livable wherever you are. So I think that's the thing people should be looking for. Instead of looking outside, look inside, figure out what you want, what's going to make you feel fulfilled, and then find if you can do that where you are. And if not, you go where you need to be. Go where the love is.
Also, part two of that question, looking back, what would you do differently?
Hmm. Well, I would not laugh at the people, my friends who were telling me to buy Bitcoin when it was 5 cents. Literally, I was laughing. I was like, "You guys, what the Bitcoin? It don't even sound real, son. Come on, now you need a better name. Bit. I'm like, what is that? No, like it's only 5 cents now, but it's really gonna. Yeah, 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 yeah. Bro, that bothers me. On some days I wake up like, ah, I laughed at them. I literally was like, nah, nah, son. Oh, but besides that, let's see. And not a lot. I mean, I've tried to live a life that I wouldn't have regrets for. That's been kind of one of my guiding principles was if it's really something you want to to know about, you have to try it and go for it. So I don't have a lot of regrets there. What else besides the Bitcoin? I would there's a couple of apartments I would have probably tried to buy if I had known. Like, I mean, I had no money, but just the effort to get the loan and all that stuff. If I had known in the late '90s what real estate was going to be doing, like I might have tried it. It was still pricey back then, but not like it is now. I mean, it is like it's it's just it's a bubble. There's another bubble happening with real estate in New York. And it happens because there's out of town foreign interests are allowed to buy stuff and they don't have to live there. They're just starting to change the law where you actually have to be a resident for a certain amount of time to be able to own the property. But for a long time, that's just a money laundering base for every mafia and autocrat dictator around the world. Like just buy to people seeing a $50 million apartment in New York. It's like, wow, it's like, but it's not that big. Well, yeah, because it's completely overvalued because it's just to launder this guy's money. It has no value to reality. But so yeah, real estate maybe. Um, but really, other than that, there's not a lot of regrets. I mean, there's a couple of people that I had kind of crisscrossed with that I wish I'd actually taken more time to talk to a little bit. That's only there's a couple little things like that, but I really went for it. I mean, I lived in the time where we all got to go for things and really. So I don't. I'm glad we didn't have cell phones. A lot of this stuff wouldn't look so good on camera now. But yeah, I mean, it's. I don't really have regrets in that sense. No, it was. I'm glad I was there in the '90s, in the early 2000s. Glad to got to see it, and the end of the '80s too. Like seeing New York come out of the crack time, you could really see how that hip hop culture blew up, and graffiti culture and breakdance and all of that. The five elements, you could really see. Like, yeah, now it's so distant. It's like it doesn't almost feel real. Like, yeah, but that was there were gangs then. It was like New York had its own gang culture, and hip hop squashed it. So I'm glad I got to be there at that time when, the late 80s, when we were transitioning out of that rough, crazy gang crack time into more cultural expression as a way to show who you are. Um, yeah, I'm really happy about that. But yeah, no regrets really. I mean, I wish David Dinkins had won, become mayor the second time. Everybody who was part of that election knows Giuliani. They rigged that. Giuliani lost the second time. They just rigged that straight up. New York would have had a very different flavor if it had another term of David Dinkins. He was very pro club, pro music, pro culture, um, and yeah, pro people of color. And so it was just those last Giuliani years, the late '90s, early. It was like weird. Like he squashed the club scene in a big way, but there was nothing we could do. Like we did try to stop him, but I wish that had gone the other way. That's one thing.
What advice would you give to the next generation?
Um, hmm. Yeah, I mean, going back to what I said earlier, like figure out what you want to do, like what makes you feel fulfilled and feel excited about life, and then try to find a way to share that and get paid from it if you can. And I think there's so many ways to do it now that don't involve in-person appearances, but you still have to put in some work. And that consistency, whether it's online or in a club, or doing stuff on a weekly basis where people know it's coming, and for your own skills and for your audience, it helps make everything better. So I would just, I think, I see kids trying everything now, and they're just, whatever, they if something sticks, they go with it. And I respect that hustle, because now there's so many more options digitally, and you don't know what's gonna pop off really, but you have to keep working at it. I think a lot of people think it's just gonna happen, and it's like, no, you still have to put in work. You still have to put in some hours. I still believe in the 10,000 hour rule. I don't care what you're doing, whatever it is, you put in those 10,000 hours, you're gonna be great at that, whatever it is. So I think, the main thing, kids got to be ready to work, but just if you do something you enjoy, it doesn't feel like work, and you can actually put in hours and not even notice it. And that's really the key to do it. Finding something you love, then you can do it, and it's not really going to be painful. It's actually going to help you feel better about life. So find that thing, whatever it is, and find a way to market it, and still, if it's possible, keep your joy. A lot of people start doing stuff they loved, and then it becomes too much of a job, and they lose that. So it's a balancing act. But yeah, I think the main thing is find something that excites you, and try to share it.
Where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born in Chicago, and I grew up a few places because my parents were ministers in the AME church. So I'm a preacher's kid. So that's kind of like almost like being an army brat, because the preacher gets assigned to different churches around the kind of national network of these churches. So in the AME church, they have districts, and districts like fourth district will be like Illinois and Indiana, and Canada, or this. So every district will have X number of churches, and so I was born in Chicago, lived in that area for first 2 or 3 years. That's where all my mom's family's from, and Mississippi, and then we moved to Iowa when I was little, like uh, Burlington, Iowa, and Des Moines, Iowa. I lived I lived a few places for like a year and a half, 2 years. I was in Canada, Toronto for like 2 years when I was little, first through third grade, and then Kentucky. I was in Kentucky for a few years, then and while I was there, I was in this gifted program that ended up getting me to Duke University, summer school, marching band, and all that. And then through that, I went to boarding school, and that through that, I got to. I always wanted to end up in New York. I wanted to be a writer, and I'm writing my first book right now. Actually, I'm halfway through it. Um, it's nonfiction, but it has you know different storytelling styles. It's about. I had a brain tumor last year, and I healed it through some non-traditional plant medicine combined with cymatic sound healing, which is sound frequencies. I went off the beaten path to do it and took a lot of effort and craziness, and I'm still, on a daily basis with. But I'm doing well. I'm doing great, and But I came to New York because I wanted to write, and I knew music would always be in my life. I could just do music on the side, so. But when I got to New York, I was at Columbia and I was just starting to realize, like, yeah, music is actually the real thing, and college is on the side. So gradually, music took over. Being in New York, it's like you have the best teachers for any field you want to do. If it's creative, they're all there, and everybody's kind of equalized. They're the top from wherever they're from. But when you get to New York, everybody kind of equals out again, and you have to reprove who you are and find your way. So I think one great thing about New York, still, if you want to get individual lessons, private sessions with teachers, the best in the world, you could still get them in New York, just at somebody's house, in a park, whatever. Like, they need to eat and you need the lessons. And so you can still get the best one-on-one lessons of anywhere in the world in New York. So you don't need a school for that. You just need a place to find these people, and you can find them. And so, yeah, I still recommend New York for lessons of any kind or apprenticeships. If you have the time and energy you can donate, you can do an apprenticeship in New York that will take you a long way.
When you were in New York, during like the whole group collective and Giant Step era, what was your day job? Like, how did you pay the bills?
Well, I mean, up until so, like when I was coming out of right before Groove Collective got signed, I was doing temp agency stuff in offices. And then when everything hit with Giant Step and Groove Collective and repercussions and all, I mean, yeah, I was full time. I had unemployment up. I was still getting unemployment up until summer of '92, and then I let it go, and I went full time music after that. And yeah, I mean, and it was then in 2000, I decided I wanted to keep doing turntables on the Hudson, stop doing Groove Collective, but also I want to make more money. So I went back to temping, but I found an agency that only works with music companies and publishing companies. So I was just working at like Sony and you know Condé Nast and a couple. I was mainly music and a couple of publishing companies, temping there for about a year, off and on. Um, and then around 2000 and yeah, after 9/11, like conversely, yeah, gigs picked up and yeah, I went back to full-time music again after 9/11. So, um, and then in the meantime, so yeah, I started video editing. So I picked up some video editing gigs over the years and um composition production stuff like interstitials, making music for some TV interstitials and web stuff. But it's mainly been music. I mean, I've been blessed. But also, you do like you step out on faith. The more you put out there, the more return you get. Sometimes it's like it's a gamble. It's like high risk, high reward. But then after a while, you start getting used to it, and then it just starts to be, kind of your normal now. So yeah, um, I've been blessed, definitely, but there's also a lot of work. It's a lot of hustle. I mean, when you're self-employed, you have to be hustling. It's a daily operation. You got to be looking ahead, months ahead. Like, okay, I'm booking things. It's like in the fashion world, you're booking the next season or 2 seasons ahead. Like you're always thinking about like, okay, I'm good now, but what about I know the slow time is coming between January and March and nothing's happening. So then you gotta always be thinking you don't have that weekly steady income no matter what you do. So there's a trade-off. You have a day job, you got all that consistency and reliability. It's boring. It steals your energy. You hate waking up, all of that. But then you get this comfort factor that's built into it as well, where you don't have to stress. So it's like always a trade-off. You have to decide, is it worth the stress to get these rewards of making my own way? Or do I want to be more comfortable now and just put up with the bullshit? And so it's always for me, with COVID came and everybody was like, what do we do? Because all the gigs were gone, nightlife gigs, and they're not going to come back fully. Everybody's changed the way they interact with arts and culture and music and movies, and that's been an adjustment for people to figure out, how do I fit into that new paradigm? And do I want to fit into that new where is it? So that's been a real challenge the last couple of years, is like seeing long-term artists who had a steady path get rocked really hard and have to find a way or revert to some other new thing. Sometimes the new thing is cool because you didn't plan it and it might be some really great thing. And sometimes it makes people go under. It's just always, you know, I'm just starting to get back to gigs being more steady, but I'm also working on other stuff. I was like, okay, I've been wanting to write a book. It's time. This is it. This is, you know, who knows how much longer people will be reading. It's like this is the last days of literacy. So get in on this while we can, like it ain't gonna be forever. So yeah, it's an interesting time, man.
What do you want your legacy to be?
Oh man. I don't even I don't really think I mean I guess mainly that I made some people feel some things, and good and bad, and just to make people feel, and just I shared my some love and some laughter and some joy and some thoughtfulness, and I facing going through a life-threatening illness, it puts some things in perspective. I was never a huge legacy ego person, but going through that life-threatening stuff, it really I can see, I've already felt from a lot of people around me, they've expressed to me what I mean to them and meant to them, and that's really nice to hear and feel. And it's so I'm I know I've already made some cool music and art that will last beyond me. I would like to make some more and do some stuff that people didn't expect. And yeah, for me, that finish I made a big to-do list, bucket list last summer, and when I didn't know if I was going to be able to do all of it. I still don't know, but going through that list is great, and just make doing things one by one, finish up little things. But yeah, being there for my family and my friends, and yeah, and just helping some other people get through some hard times with some art I made, some creative thing I did or said. That will make me feel good.
Is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to speak on?
No, man, I think I rambled way too much. But thank you for letting me do it.
Thank you. This was fantastic. Interview will be live in about a month. I'll ping you when it goes live.
Okay, great, man. And yeah, just thanks for the opportunity. And I really love what you post. You're very diverse in your range of topics and people. And I could tell you've been around. I was like, nah, it's good to get a sense now more. But it's so cool, man. Yeah, and the whole thing with Louis, I didn't realize that. That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. It was, looking back, you realize that was we experienced the golden era of a lot of genres of hip hop,
Yeah,
art,
yeah.
of house,
House. Yep.
um, just amazing, amazing
Yep.
times. Yeah.
It is. It is. I mean, House is still blowing up in its own way. I mean, I'm happy to see House has survived through the whole EDM mess. Like the
Yes.
real House is still going. So I was worried about it for a while, but it's going strong. So I'm having South Africa, the whole just the way Africa is now playing a big role in this music thing now. It's beautiful to see also.
It's
I
it's
love it.
incredible. It's incredible.
It is, man.
Cool,
All
man.
right,
Thank you.
my brother.
I'll ping you when it's live.
All right, thank you. Have a great rest of the day.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Peace, brother.
Peace.